Yes, in Detroit, Hollywood. My name is Dan Saletti, and this is As the Reel Turns, your place for all things movie and television. And we're happy to be back here with our COVID Nebula edition at home. We're all gonna die thingamajiggy. We're using a brand new format here, the ever popular Zoom. I couldn't resist. I'm sorry. So yes, the ever popular Zoom. We're using that, and I think it's a little bit better quality. So I think we should be okay. And we're going to be talking about kind of bouncing off of what we did last week with our kids show edition. We're going to be talking about a company that has done kid shows that were meant to be starting off originally as adult shows, but are now kind of for the whole family type of a thing. And it's a whole mix-up of fun. And the company we're talking about is a popular cartoon company called Hanna Barbera. Yes, Hanna Barbera, a classic cartoon company that has been producing cartoons for quite a long time. Started out by two guys named William Hanna and Joseph Barbera. And we're going to be talking about that with two, hopefully three coming soon, guys. First of all, we have a guy by the name of Mr. John. Say hello, John.
Hello. Welcome to the wide world of knockoff non-Disney cartoons.
There you go. And then we also have Mr. Dylan. Say hello, Dylan.
What's going on?
Not too much, man. Always good to have you on the show. So, guys, we're going to be talking about Hanna-Barbera. And here's one thing that I never really knew about it, because I was doing some research about the show, about the topic today before we started the show off. And I initially thought that this was a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, but I wasn't quite sure. But then I found out, sure enough, it was. The first cartoon we're going to be talking about, and then we'll be also talking about some opinions and stuff like that, is a cartoon classically by the name of Tom and Jerry. Now, the main reason I thought that this wasn't initially a Hanna-Barbera production was because that nowadays a lot of their characters are owned by Warner Brothers, and this was an MGM cartoon. So you had to think about that, like, is it the same people? But, you know, obviously they can work for different studios. So, Dylan, we'll go to you first. I'm sure you've heard of this cartoon, the classic cat and mouse game. Ha ha ha, funny. It's a classic slapstick show. What are your thoughts on this and then Hanna-Barbera in general?
I mean, I love Tom and Jerry. It's great. It's for kids, and just in Hanna-Barbera in general, it's like a staple of entertainment, and it's timeless. It's timeless because all the cartoons hold up very well. They're very well written. I mean, obviously you'll have some better than the others, but it's something that was a staple of my childhood, at least, and it will never get old. And, well, as we're stuck in quarantine right now, or lockdown, then why not watch it?
Exactly. And we've just been joined by another guest, friendly face, Mr. Christy Riley. Say hello, Christy.
Hello, Christy.
There he is. Hey, nice view out there, buddy. So, Christy, we're talking about Hanna-Barbera today, and we're jumping on to our first cartoon of Tom and Jerry. So what are your thoughts on them and then Hanna-Barbera as a company?
I don't know too much about Hanna-Barbera. In fact, I've never even heard the name until recently, but I friggin' love Tom.
And we've lost him, apparently, as well.
Rip.
No, they crap out of each day. I love all of them, and I especially love the one where both kill themselves.
Well, that's an interesting opinion there. John, we'll go to you next. What are your thoughts on the two of them and the company in general?
Well, Hanna-Barbera, I mean, you could say that it's. I'm trying to think of a good comparison because it's got this sort of vibe where it didn't pioneer animation the same way that Disney did, right? Disney was for the longest time the not monopoly, but certainly the biggest name in animation for what 50 years, something like that. A very, very long time. And so when Hanna-Barbera came along, it had this sort of an effect of number one, benefiting from Disney's success, and number two, I think improving on it. Hanna-Barbera's biggest strength, I believe, was the inclusion of director Chuck Jones, who became a giant in animation, who spearheaded all of Tom and Jerry and was visually one of the legends, one of the pillars of animation afterwards, who brought that sort of slapstick and visual absurd humor into something that wasn't absurd before, that made it this weird blend of visual realism and just complete visual insanity, and that was what Tom and Jerry started for Hanna-Barbera, and that was what brought countless others into the fold. That was what started it, and I think it deserves a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this was one that I really didn't watch a lot of, but you have to keep asking yourself with this company, because of especially the next show that we're going to talk about, were they mainly for adults or were they mainly for kids? Because the next show was probably the most, if not the one of, if not the most famous thing they'd ever done, which was intentionally made for adults and was the first primetime cartoon, that being one of the most popular ones ever, the Flintstones.
From the town of Bedrock, they're a page right out of history. Let's ride with the family down the street.
Now, this is a cartoon that, like I said, made for adults originally because it was supposed to be like a popular show at the time called The Honeymooners, just in caveman times. And then it was originally made for adults, primetime cartoon, but it grew into a beloved kids one. This was a popular one. It went on for like 6 seasons around that, and it's gone through multiple incarnations. Tom and Jerry had a few, and still have a few, but this one has gone through continuations and sequels and prequels, and then a live-action movie that I know John really wants to talk about because it's his favorite thing ever. But
and Serial. Don't forget Serial.
Serial too. Yeah, absolutely. John, we'll go to you first since you love that movie so much.
My Pebbles.
What are your thoughts on the Flintstones?
The Flintstones is a time and a place above all else.
That's for sure.
It's, well, obviously, setting wise, but in terms of I think the Flintstones, we underrate it because it's a cartoon. We think of it just in relation to other cartoons, and I think that's wrong too. Obviously, we're doing more than that here. I mean, you already brought up the Honeymooners comparison, but
exactly
in terms of the Flintstones' place and what it did for the network sitcom, of making it okay to satirize that sort of cultural hegemony that was there already with stuff like the Honeymooners and everything else that had existed up to that point. It became an outlet, that made other writers more comfortable stretching the bounds of what the sitcoms were. Like there are no bottle episodes in Leave It to Beaver. There's nothing, there are no parodies, there are no spoofs, there's
Nice callback.
there's nothing like that. But the Flintstones opened a door for other writers, other artists and through animation, because you couldn't. I don't think that you could have opened that door if you were making a live action show that was a parody of the Honeymooners. If they made the Flintstones live action to begin with, they wouldn't have been, number one, they wouldn't have been able to render so much of the stuff that they could, because at that point special effects budgets were paper thin, certainly for sitcoms.
Oh yeah.
So it opened the door to, later on, so many shows being able to parody their own genre,
Yeah.
that is certainly within the sitcom space, it made it, and just beyond that, it's timeless comedy that became more timeless because of its impact.
Yeah, and I mean, you think about this, and there were a lot of famous things that came out of this. I mean, you heard in not only is the theme song itself timeless, but you heard Fred Flintstone's classic catchphrase of "Yabba Dabba Doo," and you have memorable characters like his wife Wilma, their neighbors, the Rebels. The Rebels being Barney and Betty, which I'm sure Barney, dinosaurs, I have to believe that's where they got one of the connections from. I mean, just think about it. And of course, speaking of dinosaurs, you have their pet Dino, and of course their kids, Pebbles and Bam Bam. Dylan, you spoke briefly just a second ago about how they did leave a legacy. I mean, not only all the other interpretations, but they have cereal and stuff like that. Why do you think that these characters are so bankable and marketable? Except we can't hear you. We still can't hear him. Oh well. No, we still can't hear him, but that's okay. We'll come back to you. We'll come back to you. Christine, we'll move on to you. Why do you said that you haven't seen too many of Hanna-Barbera things, and you haven't heard of them mostly, but everybody has at least seen a clip or maybe even a full episode of the Flintstones. Have you?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's a pretty cool show.
Yeah,
I like it.
I mean, and you're definitely a classic television lover because you've spoken about a lot of shows that we talked about. Do you think that they were trying to satirize stuff like, Honeymooners and stuff like that, or do you think that they're just their own thing?
They were their own thing.
Their own thing, yeah.
Yep.
And I gotta say, I love the background. Nice callback. Nice callback to Frasier there. Dylan, are you back with us? Still not back with us. I'll say this real quick as he fixes his mic there. You were talking about the live action film, and okay, yes, it has its faults, but you got to look at it in a way that it's being comical still. And honestly, some of the casting was pretty good. I mean, who else would you have play Fred Flintstone but John Goodman? Let's be honest here. John, am I right about this?
In terms of casting?
In terms of casting, I mean, the cast did a pretty good job, except for maybe Rosie O'Donnell. But
Rick Moranis as Barney Rubble is a choice. I mean, are you right? Strictly speaking, no. But your point on John Goodman, I think, is correct.
Okay.
Goodman is... See, the interesting thing about that is that Goodman was doing that, and this is going back to my idea about, Flintstones opening up satirization of sitcoms.
Okay.
It's important to keep in mind that and there were 2 live-action movies, for the record. You're forgetting Viva Rock Vegas.
Yeah, absolutely. But, maybe had a better Barney Rubble in the form of Stephen Baldwin, I want to say.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But in terms of John Goodman, keep in mind, he was, at the time, right high off of Roseanne. So he's doing that same thing that the animators were doing in the original of satirizing what they'd been doing. Because Roseanne, I mean, basically, just a reversed version of the Flintstones in terms of its character dynamics, but
Anti-sitcom.
true. But so it's doing the same thing, and that's why it's so interesting that Goodman not only got cast but also took the role, because being in that position at that time, it was not exactly the healthiest career move, perhaps, to satir. No, I mean, I say maybe it's wrong for me to say that he satirized his own sitcom, because the movie did not exactly do a massively great job of satirizing much of anything. It probably would have needed a coherent plot to do that, but
Those sets were
but in terms of casting, yes, I definitely agree that Goodman was necessary to keep it from crashing entirely.
Dylan, I think we have you back now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we do. Yes,
Thank you.
There he
Thank
is.
you.
Okay. Good
Sorry about that.
No, don't worry about it. My question to you is about the fame, basically, of this show, and how Hanna-Barbera has done many, many, many interpretations, but they've also done marketing, like the cereal you said before. Why is this cartoon, out of basically all of them, bankable and marketable?
Because it's staple and culture.
Fair enough.
That's it. And everyone loves cartoon characters. That's what they do with commercials now. They add cartoon characters, or at least pop culture, and they sell stuff. Barney, my pebbles.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
Like I've said before, they've done multiple interpretations. A personal favorite of mine is when they did A Christmas Carol. I actually like that one. I have it on this thing called a VHS. I don't know if you guys have heard of those, but
Hey, Boomer.
I'm older than you, Daniel. I would know.
I know.
I still have a ton of VHS.
Yeah, so do I. So I mean, it's not. But some people, you got to think about it. And so that was kind of the staple. And then usually the second tier down is, I think the two guys were thinking there. They were thinking like, well, we've gone all the way back to the Stone Age. What would happen if we went all the way to the future? And so they did go to the future, and they had basically their second hit, which was the Jetsons.
Meet George Jetson. His boy Elroy. Daughter Judy. Jane, his wife.
So yes, this was basically the reverse of what we just talked about. You had the past, now we have the future. The 60s, had a lot of this type of future look to the thing, future look to them. We had the space race going on, and then obviously I won't say anything else was coming around during the 60s, but they were just going to Final Frontiers and stuff like that. I won't say anymore. Anyway, so a lot of the time you had this space look. And this was no exception. You had basically the entire family that was listed there, George, Elroy, Judy, and Jane. They also have a talking dog that precedes the infamous Scooby-Doo in the form of Astro, and then also a robot maid named Rosie. I gotta be honest, I think I watched this one more than the Flintstones, maybe, but I can't confirm that. Dylan, we'll go to you first on this one. Why do you think that Hanna-Barbera made the move to do complete opposite from what their original hit was and go to the future?
They jumped on the space bandwagon. Everyone loves space, and so they just moved Flintstones in space. And it works, because once again, you're doing the same, family dynamic sitcom, and, it's animation, and you gotta love it. You gotta love it. You should watch the Family Guy parodies of the Jetsons. It makes it funny.
I don't know if I want to. That's the thing. Have you seen any episodes personally, or?
Not really. I've seen a few clips. Obviously, I've seen the Family Guy parody, but I don't know. I really just haven't. I like it. From what I have seen, I liked it, but you know,
Here's the
I'm
thing,
older, so I can't really enjoy that.
right? I mean, with all the nostalgia that, especially that we talked about last week with the kid shows, I see that. I think that people will give this a second watch. John, we'll go to you next. With this show, I believe when they originally released it, only lasted one season, and then you flash
one
back
year.
all the way to the 80s, and that's where you get seasons 2 and 3.
Is that true?
Was they? I think so. I think so.
You are. That's crazy.
Do you think that just people were used to the Flintstones, and they said, "Why would we want to change?" Or do you think that that just wasn't as much of a hit?
It's hard to tell. I think on paper, looking at by all metrics, it probably should have been a hit. I mean, keep in mind this is 1962, 63. Kennedy's in the White House. Everybody's high off their minds on everybody really wanting to go to the moon, go into space, beat the Russians in the space race type thing. It should, in terms of what's the word? In terms of cultural environment, I think it was right. In terms of quality, less so. It didn't have the animation that the Flintstones had. It was really understaffed, under budget. It was. I mean, it's interesting because it's animation wise, it's not the best, but like in terms of aesthetics, it's I think far and away better than the Flintstones in terms of what they were going for. Like you remember what the Flintstones looked like, sure, but you really, the Jetsons, whether it influenced or was influenced, that happened on both sides, but it really struck a chord, certainly with artists. Every juristic show or piece of pop art or just art in general became sort of a Jetsons light. This even in the intervening years, in the 20-year period where there were no new episodes, where it was just the first season, it was all the ray guns, hoops around everything, giant floating apartment buildings type thing. It was just, that's what it was. It became this aesthetic thing without having the animation behind it, because it's very rudimentary when you look at it right now. And the writing also wasn't particularly there. But I think the reason that it stayed around long enough to get rebooted in the 80s was the aesthetics of it, and the fact that it's so much influenced, what we now consider retrofuturist art, now.
Right.
It influenced that so much, and now it's in the pantheon, despite not lasting that long. Even with the 80s reboot, it was only 3 seasons, and that's only 75 episodes. I mean, they're long seasons. It was back then, but still, it's great. It's really, it shouldn't necessarily have stayed that long, but it did, and that's a testament. Not necessarily to its quality. I don't think it holds up particularly well, but in terms of its cultural power, that's beyond what most shows get.
Absolutely, and I mean, first of all, I like the background. Nice tie-in with Cease Gleebert there.
It's a boy.
Yeah, you have to think about it in a way that they were crazy with space, and Kennedy being in the office promoting the space race, all that stuff. So and Christy, I mean, we've had lots of views of the future. Obviously the big time Star Trek, and then in some people's minds, the closest thing we've gotten is Back to the Future for some people with 2015 and all that stuff. Do you think that from what we've talked about with the Jetsons and stuff like that, it really does seem like, Back to the Future and Star Trek are the paths maybe to go towards the future, but do you think we'll ever achieve the Jetsons, which is where we kind of got the big view on like stuff like flying cars and robot maids and stuff like that?
Oh, maybe we will someday. I mean, oh, and by the way, speaking of the Jetsons, I mean, I heard they once had a crossover episode with that and the Flintstones.
It was a movie.
They did.
Yeah, and believe it or not, there's actually a theory that the Flintstones actually does take place in the future and that it's a post-apocalyptic environment.
Really?
It's really interesting. Yeah.
They said the same thing about Aladdin too.
It's the Elysium of Hanna-Barbera cartoons.
All cinematic universe. That's all we have to just keep in mind. But no, you're right, and that dips into another point about this. Is like they've almost had as many incarnations as Flintstones. I mean, they not only had that crossover, but they had the reboot in the '80s, which was just kind of the same thing. And they did get a feature film in the form of an animated film, not live action, but it was animated, and it's a little weird, but it's not awful. It came out in 1990, I believe.
Pretty awful.
I kind of like it sometimes. And then both the Flintstones, the Jetsons, and then the third person we'll talk about in this like Hanna-Barbera trifecta here, they had a crossover with WWE. Some reason, I don't know why. And now here, I'm going to play our dear friend Casey Schmidl-Gagne here again and say that the voice of Judy Jetson was played by none other than Danica.
Damn it.
So there's the connection for today. It's always good to have that.
Not Daniel's girlfriend.
You can definitely see. However, John, you were right. You can definitely see the connection. I'm sorry, not the connection. The improvement on animation between the '60s first season and the '80s seasons 2 and 3. You can definitely see this there.
Animation-wise, certainly.
Yeah, animation-wise. So before we go anywhere, before we come to our third person in this trifecta, I said I'm going to try and make this as much like a radio show as possible. So that means I think I have now officially gotten the audio right in a way that we can actually have a real PSA. So I love the enthusiasm. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this quick public service announcement. And to play us out, I'll have the rest of the Jetsons theme.
Once there was a medicine man. And
Hold on a second.
Ranger Station, Ranger speaking.
Hi. I'd like to report a bear hug.
Okay.
Well, before I left my campsite, I was putting out my fire, and out of nowhere, Smokey Bear showed up and hugged me?
So you drowned the fire, you stirred it, drowned it again, and felt that it was cold?
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah. He likes it when people correctly put out their campfires. He's pretty big on wildfire prevention. He's just letting you know you did good with a hug. He's a hugger.
I just got a bear hug from Smokey Bear. Status update!
All right, I'm going to let you go now. I've got a lot of ranger stuff to do. There are many ways to start a fire, but one sure way to put it out. Learn how you can do your part at SmokeyBear.com.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Sponsored by the U.S. Forest Service, Ad Council, and your state forester.
Hey everyone, Daniel Saletti here, and we're back on As the Reel Turns. Just want to let you know that we are highlighting pretty much what would be considered the top 4 Hanna-Barbera cartoon characters today. These people have had films and other, referenced spin-offs and stuff like that over the years. So we didn't get to every single one of them. I do want to highlight a few that we didn't talk about. I will highlight a few later on in the show, but right now there are the ever-popular Smurf characters, the little blue characters. They've had a couple spin-offs, and of course the 2 live-action films. They are a little bit of a controversial thing because, they can get a little bit annoying, but they're always fun to watch. Another big Hanna-Barbera one was Johnny Quest, kind of like a secret agent type of a kid, and he would go on these different missions, and he had a bunch of other spin-offs as well. Even Hanna-Barbera delved into some other popular cartoons that were not their original characters, and a lot of them were sometimes superheroes, and one show was the Super Friends. Super Friends are basically the little bit lighthearted version of the Justice League. Same characters, kind of similar plots, same villains. If you're a classic cartoon superhero fan, definitely give it a watch. All right, back to the guys and me, and here we go.
Where are you? We got some work to do now. Scooby-Dooby-Doo, where are you? We need some help from you now. Come on, Scooby-Doo, I see.
All right, we are back on the show, and I'm so happy that we still have Patrick Warburton doing our ads. I love that guy. So yes, we're talking about some Hanna-Barbera hits today. The famous cartoon studio. We've talked about some of their early things, such as I didn't know they did Tom and Jerry, and then of course their first primetime special or primetime show of the Flintstones, and then their futuristic version of that, basically in the form of the Jetsons. Probably one of the most. I said before the break that there is a trifecta. There's a 3-ring Hanna-Barbera group consisting of 3 different shows, and this is kind of the 3rd show because it's probably one of the most famous with kids. And it is one of the longest running, kind of with the Flintstones in the way that it has many, many, many incarnations. Some good, some not so good. And if you want to know a lot more about it, you should listen to our entire show devoted to this character. But and it was one of our favorites. But of course, that theme song belongs to Scooby-Doo. And specifically, the Scooby-Doo Where Are You? That was the main show done by Hanna-Barbera. And they did a lot of the other short-lived shows that came after that, pretty much all the way through the 80s. We seem to have lost Christy. We'll go to you, Dylan, first.
I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Okay, cool. We'll go to you first, Dylan. You were there on our Scooby-Doo show, so you obviously are a huge fan of this character. What makes this character a little bit different from the Jetsons and the Flintstones?
I'm just going to say it. I think because it's the one that's really still going on. It's lasted so long. It's a staple of the mystery genre. I mean, yeah, I know it's Men in Masks. It's innocent. It's 4 kids and a dog solving mysteries. But I mean, what more can you ask? It's simple. It's funny. It's straightforward. It's at times it can get pretty scary.
Yeah.
Once again, the cat creature.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I know. I'm just saying with which police shows like Law and Order and not 911, TJ Hooker, whatever. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's just like it fits into that genre so well, and it's it's there's nothing like really bad about it. There's no like inappropriate stuff, and it's just it's good, and it's got celebrities, and the animation is very good, and yeah, it's still going on. If you want to hear me gush about it, just watch the previous radio show. But yeah,
exactly. I'm gonna have to put.
You know what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, I know what you're saying.
It's popular and it holds up very well.
Christy, we'll go to you next. You were also there at our Scooby-Doo show, and
Yes,
we talked about a lot of the incarnations, but mainly with Scooby-Doo Where Are You? Dylan spoke a lot about how the show kind of worked, but I mean, it is also going on, like he said, for a long, long time now, and they've had multiple incarnations.
New movies coming out, I think either next year or this year.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Probably been pushed back, but
Yeah. But do you think that kind of Scooby-Doo has had his course, and you think people are getting like Scooby fatigue?
No, I think Scooby-Doo is amazing for all ages, and I don't think it's ever going to get old. It's a classic, and and as I said in the it's the John Cena thing. That's a little ridiculous, but I think it's cool. We had the Zombie Island movie night that one time. That was fun.
Yeah.
And another thing is, as I said in my rant, though, I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, you should still go after Fred.
I mean, here's the thing. I do think that sometimes some get a little bit of a fatigue. John, you and I certainly talked about this when we had our entertainment update you and I just had. I mean, we were talking about how people may have Frasier fatigue, and people had definitely Star Trek fatigue after Enterprise. And like Christy mentioned, and so did I, they had the WWE crossover as well. Something as classic and as beloved to some people as this cartoon is, can it get a little bit too ridiculous? I mean, it already kind of is. Like, can it get almost too ridiculous?
I think it's important to qualify that when it comes to fatigue is only relevant when it comes to the landscape around it. I think we have to keep in mind that Scooby-Doo, in terms of tone, in terms of aesthetic, is it came out in the 60s around a time when the people that made it were growing up with two major influences, the first being Universal monster movies, the classics that really just sort of stopped getting made. Like, those movies don't exist anymore as far as new ones go. So there's that, and also variety shows that had constant celebrity guests and constant, I guess, not meta commentary, but just putting the meta into the show, which Scooby-Doo has had throughout its entire run. And I don't think fatigue has set into people, because who else is doing either of those things right now in either TV or movies? There's nobody continuing the legacy of the schlocky but still classic Universal horror films. There's nobody doing tacky but still always really fun celebrity cameos in children's television. Okay, go for it.
I mean, I am, but
oh yeah, but you don't count. But as far as the entire
no, never counts.
As far as the fatigue thing goes, you can't have that unless somebody is doing other things, unless other people are doing the same thing you are. People got tired of Star Trek around Enterprise because other shows were doing Star Trek. Some were doing it, most were doing it worse, some were doing it better. But, there was sci-fi fatigue at the time. Star Wars had hit huge by the time Enterprise came out. Both Battlestar Galactica shows got the same sort of thing at the same time. But once it, so that's one example. But, Frasier also got fatigue because, well, it didn't get fatigue. That's my argument. But, that happened, the people that argue that there was Frasier fatigue are the same people arguing that there was sitcom fatigue, because there were so many sitcoms in the 90s, That's the thing. And so there's nobody doing Scooby-Doo. There's no Scooby-Doo parodies at this point. There's other cartoons, but they're not following that formula. There are no, I think it might be a stretch to call it a horror cartoon, but it's the closest thing that we have to it.
Right.
And nobody else is taking that risk, because Scooby-Doo got that formula, got so right, and there's no way to replicate it without looking like a carbon copy. So I think that's why it's still going, and why fatigue hasn't set in yet.
And the thing about Scooby-Doo is that, one, it's been released in increments, you get the 60s, but then you jump to the 70s and the 80s, but also they try something different each time. It isn't always men in masks. In Scooby-Doo, what's new Scooby-Doo? It's the 21st century. So there's robots, and there's some actual monsters. So yeah, they try something new, and it's not like they move on. if you know what I mean.
Hmm.
They try something different. And that's why it still holds up.
Yeah, I agree.
They even made live action movies, but we won't talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, if you really want to see us gush on Scooby-Doo, definitely check out on Daniel TBS the Scooby-Doo show that we did in the As the Real Turns playlist.
There's his channel plug again.
Yeah, there I go. Hey, my show.
It's going to be my show next year. But
you have to admit, it was a good episode. It was a good episode. So yeah, I mean, so like, and that's what I've been calling these three like the trifecta, and they're really kind of the Hanna-Barbera royalty, because they're the three that you think about when you think this company is Flintstones, Jetsons, Scooby-Doo. That's not to say that they were alone in this company, because they had multiple other original characters that came into view. Some have, are like on the next tier, however. And probably one of the names that is big enough on this next tier is this one right here.
Yogi Bear is smarter than the average bear. Yogi Bear is always in the ranger's hair. At a picnic table you will find him there. Stuffing down more goodies than the average bear. He will sleep till noon.
So yes, Yogi Bear, he's kind of on that second tier. He had he actually made his first appearance in another character that we'll talk about, and he had a big show, and again, like the theme song just said, there, famous for saying "I'm smarter than the average bear." There isn't too much else to say though. He steals picnic baskets, and that's pretty much it. He hasn't had too many other incarnations, however. He had a direct-to-DVD film that I watched, an animated film actually focused on Easter, upcoming holiday. Really cheesy, really, really cheesy, almost like, holes, like Swiss cheese cheesy. And then, of course, there was a live-action version that was interesting to say. Christy, we'll go to you first. It's a simple plot. Steal basket, annoy Rangers. Does that seem like a good idea? And do you think they could do other things with that?
They probably could. I mean, I don't have too much experience with Yogi Bear and stuff, but I did see this one. The only experience I've really had is this Family Guy episode where Peter Griffin kills Yogi Bear and he tells Boo Boo to tell the other bears what he saw. But, yeah. And also, whose line is it anyway, where somebody announces that he's killed Boo Boo? Where Yogi Bear announces he's killed Boo Boo.
Yeah, so yeah, I think he's definitely a character to poke fun at. John, we'll go to you next. I mean, you kind of spoke a very small opinion about the movie there. But it's a wholesome enough cartoon. It seems like it's definitely part of this Hanna-Barbera family. Why do you think that it's kind of been poked fun at over the years?
I mean, I think it's interesting to note in terms of Yogi Bear's relative success, and I would put success in quotes. It did not run long.
No.
It ran 33 episodes over the course of 27 years. It had the exact same thing that the Jetsons had, where it had a season in the 60s, failed miserably, got revived in the 80s, same time as the Jetsons, and had almost half as many episodes. It was not well received. It was aesthetically well received as far as Yogi Bear became it became the face of Hanna-Barbera. I think that's the main thing that happened was Hanna-Barbera made Yogi him and Fred Flintstone, the two that were on all of the stationery, on all of the marketing material type stuff. Yeah. But Yogi Bear didn't really have it never had the actual tangible success that a Scooby-Doo or Flintstones or a Jetsons did. It was much more of I don't want to call it a marketing gimmick, but kind of a marketing gimmick.
Yeah.
It got just as many, brand deals as the Flintstones did. It was on just as well, not just as many serials. There became a lot of Flintstone serials over the years, but it became this almost outsized success compared to the show itself. Like, not even in terms of quality. I mean, the quality's okay. You can argue that it's not, but it's not. It's just inoffensive in general. It's just kind of there as far as history goes. But in terms of its success, it's odd. It shouldn't be as well known as it is. That's not necessarily a value judgment. That's just in terms of what a show like that, with the relative success that it had, should have garnered.
Kind of a cult classic.
It's not even a cult classic because who's going back and watching Yogi Bear?
Cult classic meaning like it might not be as popular as like Scooby Doo, but it's like it has its dedicated fans. Because that's what you're saying.
I don't even think it's got dedicated fans. That's the thing. I think it became such a force of nature that it stopped being about the show and started being about the idea of the show, if that makes sense. That it stopped being the,
It got a life of its own.
It did. It stopped being about getting the picnic basket and just started about being Yogi Bear,
If I could say this, Daniel, I just researched. There's a new series on HBO this year. It's called Jellystone. It's a revival. Yeah, it hasn't been released yet, but I just found that out.
Huh? I didn't know that.
Also interesting to note.
See what happens.
Jellystone Park in New Hampshire, the place for the one place where people actually care about Yogi Bear in real life.
I was gonna bring this up closer to the end, but I mean, we're at close to the end. Well, okay, we'll speed this up. Hey, we're on no time slot. There are a lot of actual theme parks devoted to these characters. I know there's, I think, one in South Dakota. I think there's another one somewhere, but I think it's in South Dakota. There's one. A desert. It's just flat out desert, but someone constructed a Flintstones park. Literally, there are the houses, the characters, other buildings, dinosaurs made out of fiberglass and stuff like that. If you really want to check these things out, look up Adam the Woo and the Carpetbagger. Those two guys went and investigated these places, and they are really just weird, but also I really want to go there and check it out. John, you bring up a good point as well, that there are a couple of parks named Jellystone Park and are kind of devoted to Yogi Bear. So he must have served some kind of impact on someone to do that.
Culturally, yeah, that's my point, is that the idea of Yogi Bear as a character transcends Yogi Bear as a show.
Yes. And then even the beloved Universal Studios had a ride at one point that was a Hanna-Barbera themed ride and took you on a world through all their characters and stuff like that. And like I said, featured Flintstones, Jetsons, Scooby-Doo, and your pilot and your pilots, Yogi and Boo Boo. That was it. However, there are other characters in the Hanna-Barbera universe. You have characters such as Huckleberry Hound, Snagglepuss, Quick Draw McGraw, and others. There are other characters out there, but really, you kind of only have those four. And I think to myself, why have these characters gone so much kind of in the dark over the years? Dylan, we'll start with you. And when I mean dark, I don't mean your type of dark. I just mean like...
No, what do you mean like in the dark? That's what
they've kind of lost their popularity over the years.
We were talking like Scooby-Doo and the Flintstones, running.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just say that it's still going strong, and I mean, at this time, revivals and reunions are the big thing, so they're gonna come back. We know that. I just told you there's that Jellystone reunion, new series on HBO. There's gonna be a new Scooby-Doo movie. The Flintstones are still going strong with their serials.
And then the Jetsons are.
Well, that's the thing though. Like, I mean, like every show, they run their courses, and then it just becomes like for money. But as I said, though, with revivals and reunions being a big thing now, then you know what? It's still going to go on. There's still there are people alive that still enjoyed them as a kid, so they want to relive their childhood. I enjoyed them as a kid. I think we all did, on our little VHS tapes. So no, I'm not going to say they're in the dark. It's just they have their run. Other shows come, and it's just the nature of TV and movies. But they're going to come back. They're big franchises. They're not ever going to die. No. So, I'm not going to say they're in the dark. They have their run, and then they'll come back, and then, it'll just keep going like that.
They're just
do you have any final thoughts, John? And then we'll come to you, Christy.
Yeah, in terms of them not being as prevalent as they were.
You think they'll live on?
I think it depends where. I think that it's really, it can't be discounted, the impact that Warner Brothers Animation had on Hanna-Barbera and its continued relevance or lack thereof. Looney Tunes being the cultural, nuclear bomb that it was not exactly conducive to a lot of Hanna-Barbera's characters staying relevant into the 21st century.
Yeah.
Because, it was doing that ensemble cast thing that became, iteration after iteration after iteration.
Right.
And at the end of the day, the directors that worked on Looney Tunes were just better than most of the directors working, certainly on, your C-list Hanna-Barbera stuff like Huckhound and, Quick Draw McGraw and that sort of stuff. So, it was ultimately survival of the fittest as far as, cartoon talking animals go. But I think, could they see a revival? I mean, some of them could. I don't think all of them could. Certainly Scooby-Doo has shown its penchant for dying and reviving every 5 years.
Yeah, that's
as far, I don't think we'll see a Flintstones reboot anytime soon. I don't think that I think the Flintstone has been tuckered out. I think the important thing to note as far as which ones have survived and which ones haven't in terms of Hanna-Barbera stuff is that the ones that have survived are the ones that weren't tied to satire. Jetsons and Flintstones are both functionally dead because that sort of sitcom is gone.
Right.
Whereas Scooby-Doo has survived because it's still doing something that wasn't, it's tying up loose ends, as far as the culture goes. It's doing old things. It's still satirizing stuff that hadn't yet been satirized. True. As far as, universal horror type stuff goes. So that's why it's staying around. And also the prevalence of horror as a explosively huge genre right now, it opens the door for so much stuff in Scooby-Doo, just as far as that one goes.
I think so.
But yeah, some of them will survive, most of them won't. I think that's important to keep in mind. It's not going to be around as long as Looney Tunes have been, but that's probably fine because at the end of the day, they didn't hire the best people at the time. And right. At this point, we have to accept that Warner Brothers just won the war.
And Christy, last word to you. Do you think that now you were kind of the one not knowing too much about this when we started? Do you think you will watch some of this now?
Sure. I mean, they're all classics. I know of them. They're all classics, and they're amazing. And did you guys get any James Bond news earlier?
No.
Honor Blackman, who played Pussy Galore, passed away.
Oh, that's too bad. That is too bad.
I just found that out.
Death in the Bond world. Well,
she was old, so
yeah,
94.
Well, guys, I want to thank you for coming on to the show, and I do want to quickly say, because I've been able to get the audio fixed. You know what I can do now is I can do this. Yes, it's time for Who Are You once again. We haven't done it in a long time. I'm going to play a clip for you guys, and you basically have to tell me who it is and or what it is from. Kind of a fun one today. So here's your clip, gentlemen.
Tell me the combination and give me that tablet right now, or I shall kill all of your friends, starting with the little shaggy-headed little cowman here.
So that is the clip. Do you know who it is? Dylan, we'll start with you.
Amun-Ra.
Amun-Ra, okay. Christy?
I know this one. It is, I'll say what Dylan said.
All right, Amun-Ra. Dylan? John, sorry.
I'm going to break with the pack, and I'm going to say Brother Bear 2.
Well, Dylan and Christy are the ones who are correct. That is actually Amun-Ra from Night at the Museum 2, Battle of the Smithsonian. It was a fun one. It was kind of an easy one, sort of. He's a very distinct voice, and always trying to be over the top.
And a lisp.
What's that?
And a lisp.
And a lisp, yeah, and a lisp too. Well, I want to thank you guys for coming on to the show today. We had some fun. We looked back on a couple of cartoons that some of us have seen, some of them not seen, and I think we may have to go watch the live action Flintstones now. So we will be back next week, and I want to thank you guys for coming on. My name is Dennis Saletti. This has been As the Reel Turns. Here's our outro song.
That's all, folks.